The courtroom had not even settled into its usual morning hush when Marcus Caldwell walked in like he already owned the verdict. He wore a navy suit that fit like it had been stitched onto him that morning, a watch on his wrist that cost more than most people's cars, and an expression that suggested he had somewhere better to be. Beside him sat his attorney, a sharp young man clutching a leather folder, as though it contained the keys to the kingdom. Across the aisle, in a plain gray cardigan with her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale, sat Lucia Fernandez. She was 52 years old, and for 12 years she had cleaned rooms at the Caldwell Grand Hotel, without a single complaint against her name. Today she was being accused of stealing a diamond bracelet worth $120,000 from the hotel's presidential suite, and the man sitting across from her, the man who had signed her paychecks for over a decade, was the one accusing her. Judge Judy had barely opened the case file when Marcus Caldwell spoke without being asked, his voice smooth and rehearsed, the voice of a man used to being believed the moment he opened his mouth. "Your Honor," he said, "this is simple. My housekeeping staff has access to every suite in that hotel. The bracelet went missing after Mrs. Fernandez cleaned the room. I do not know what else there is to discuss." He said it the way a man might explain that water is wet, as though the conclusion were so obvious that the trial itself was a formality he was graciously allowing to happen. Lucia's lawyer, a tired public defender with a stack of papers held together by a rubber band, tried to object, but Caldwell kept talking over him, adding that Lucia was, in his words, the only logical explanation, given that she was, quote, the only one in that room who needed the money. Somewhere in the gallery, someone gasped. Lucia did not react. She had learned, over 12 years of being spoken about rather than spoken to, how to sit still while someone decided what kind of person she was. Judge Judy's eyes lifted from the file slowly, and there was already something in them that suggested this case was not going to go the way Marcus Caldwell expected. She asked him directly whether he had any physical evidence connecting Lucia to the missing bracelet, and Caldwell smiled, the kind of smile that comes from a man who has never once had to prove anything in his life because his name has always been proof enough. "Your Honor," he said, "with respect, I do not need receipt to know who took something from my hotel. I know my staff." The words landed heavier than he intended. Judge Judy did not blink. She simply made a small note on the paper in front of her and said nothing, which somehow felt louder than anything she could have said aloud. Because sitting inside a folder on her desk, a folder considerably thicker than a simple theft accusation should require, was something Marcus Caldwell had not accounted for. A receipt. Not the one he assumed did not exist. A different one entirely. And it was about to unravel everything he thought he understood about this case. If this story is already making your blood boil, hit that like button right now, because what Judge Judy uncovers in the next few minutes is going to make you furious on Lucia's behalf. And subscribe so you never miss the moment when the truth finally gets to speak. This case had walked into that courtroom looking like a simple dispute between an employer and an employee. It was about to become something else entirely, something that would expose exactly how far a powerful man will go to protect himself when he is the one who has something to hide. Lucia had worked 12 years at the Caldwell Grand Hotel, arriving before sunrise and leaving after the guests had gone to sleep, raising 2 children on a paycheck that never quite covered everything it needed to, and never once had anyone questioned her honesty until the night a bracelet disappeared from a room owned by a man who had far more reason to make that bracelet vanish than she ever did. Lucia Fernandez had come to this country 23 years earlier with 2 suitcases and a promise to herself that her children would never have to work as hard as she did just to survive. She started as a dishwasher in a diner that no longer exists, then spent years cleaning offices at night while her children slept, and eventually landed a housekeeping position at the Caldwell Grand Hotel, a job she considered, at the time, the best thing that had ever happened to her. The pay was steady. The hours were long but predictable. She could finally plan a future instead of scrambling through the present. Over 12 years, she trained 6 new housekeepers, covered shifts for coworkers whose children were sick, and had never once, not a single time, been the subject of a complaint from a guest or a manager. Her supervisor would later tell investigators that Lucia was the person she assigned to the most sensitive rooms in the hotel, the suites belonging to celebrities, executives, and high-paying guests who expected absolute discretion, because Lucia was the one person on staff she trusted without hesitation. That trust meant nothing the morning Marcus, Caldwell, decided a missing bracelet needed a name attached to it. According to Lucia, she had cleaned the presidential suite that morning exactly as she always did, made the bed, replaced the towels, and left within 20 minutes, the same as any other day. She noticed nothing missing because nothing appeared to be missing at the time. It was not until nearly 6 hours later, after 3 other staff members and 2 guests from a neighboring suite had also passed through that floor, that hotel security reported the bracelet gone. Lucia was called into an office that afternoon, not asked what she remembered, not asked whether she had seen anything unusual, but told directly that she was the only person who had a key card and motive, and that the police were already being contacted. She was suspended without pay before she had even finished processing what was happening. 2 days later, Marcus Caldwell personally filed a police report naming her as the primary suspect, and 3 days after that, she received a court summons. In the courtroom, Judge Judy asked Lucia to describe that afternoon in her own words, and for the first time since sitting down, Lucia's composure cracked slightly, her voice trembling as she explained that she had spent 12 years earning a reputation that vanished in the span of one accusation, that her own children had asked her at dinner whether she had really stolen something, because that is what the local news had reported before she ever stepped into a courtroom to defend herself. She said she had not slept properly in 3 weeks, that she had gone from being someone trusted with a hotel's most private rooms to someone treated like a criminal in front of neighbors who used to wave to her on her way to work. Marcus Caldwell, sitting less than 10 feet away, checked his phone twice while she spoke. When Judge Judy turned back to him and asked whether he had personally reviewed the hotel's security footage from that day before filing a police report, Caldwell waved a hand dismissively, explaining that reviewing every frame of footage was, in his words, not really his job, that he had people for that, and that in any case the footage from that particular hallway had experienced what he called a technical malfunction and simply did not exist. Judge Judy's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. She asked him to repeat that. He did, this time with a slight edge of irritation, as though being asked twice was itself an inconvenience beneath him. Judge Judy asked whether it struck him as unusual that the only camera covering the one hallway relevant to this case happened to fail on the exact day a valuable item disappeared. Caldwell shrugged and said cameras break, that it happens all the time in old buildings, and that he did not see what that had to do with the fact that Lucia was the last documented person inside that room. He said the word was documented, as though it settled the matter permanently, unaware that the word itself was about to become the most dangerous word he had used all morning. Judge Judy repeated the word documented back to him slowly, letting it sit in the air the way a person lets a stone sink to the bottom of still water. Documented, she said, is an interesting choice of word, Mr. Caldwell, because documentation is exactly what I have spent the last several days collecting on this case. She reached beneath the case file sitting in front of her and produced a second folder, one considerably thicker than anything a simple missing bracelet dispute should have required. Caldwell's attorney straightened in his chair. Caldwell himself did not react at first, still wearing the faint, practiced confidence of a man who had never once had to answer for anything in his life. Judge Judy opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding up so that both sides of the courtroom could see it clearly, though only she could read what was printed on it. This, she said, is a receipt from a private jewelry appraiser located 4 blocks from the Caldwell Grand Hotel. It is dated 11 days before Mrs. Fernandez was ever accused of anything. It lists a single item, a diamond tennis bracelet, appraised and subsequently sold on consignment for $104,000. The seller listed on this receipt, Mr. Caldwell, is not Lucia Fernandez. The color that drained from Marcus Caldwell's face in that moment was the kind of thing a camera does not need slow motion to capture. His attorney turned toward him so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Caldwell opened his mouth to speak and produced nothing, the confident rehearsed voice he had used all morning suddenly nowhere to be found. Judge Judy did not wait for him to recover. She continued, her voice calm, measured, and utterly without mercy. According to hotel insurance paperwork filed the following week, she said, "You reported this same bracelet as stolen from the presidential suite and filed a claim for full replacement value. That claim, Mr. Caldwell, was for $120,000, meaning that 11 days before you ever accused Mrs. Fernandez of theft, you had already sold the very item you would later claim she stole, and then attempted to collect insurance money on top of the money you had already pocketed from the sale." The courtroom erupted into a wave of murmurs, so loud the bailiff had to raise a hand for quiet. Lucia sat frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth, 12 years of humiliation and fear collapsing into something that looked almost like disbelief that this moment was actually happening. Marcus Caldwell's attorney leaned toward his client and whispered something urgent, but Caldwell was staring at the receipt in Judge Judy's hand as though he could make it disappear through sheer force of will. Judge Judy was not finished. She explained that hotel insurance fraud of this nature was not simply a civil matter, that filing a false police report naming an innocent employee as a criminal suspect in order to conceal his own fraudulent claim exposed him to far more than the loss of this lawsuit. She noted almost as an afterthought that the so-called broken security camera Caldwell had mentioned earlier serviced not just the hallway outside the presidential suite, but the loading dock camera as well. The same loading dock through which the bracelet had, according to hotel delivery logs, left the building in a courier envelope addressed to the very appraiser whose receipt she now held in her hand. If you cannot believe what this man was willing to do to protect himself, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe right now, because Judge Judy is only just getting started. And drop the name of the city you are watching this from down in the comments, because people from every corner of the world are about to watch this man's entire world collapse in real time. Marcus Caldwell had walked into that courtroom believing his money and his name would once again do the work of shielding him from consequences the way it always had. He had accused a woman who had given 12 honest years to his hotel of stealing something he had already sold for a profit, then tried to collect twice on the same lie. What he had not accounted for was a judge who did not care how expensive his suit was, only how thin his story had become the moment a single piece of paper was placed in front of 12 million witnesses. Judge Judy set the receipt down on her desk with the deliberate calm of someone who knew the worst was still coming and wanted every person in that courtroom to feel the full weight of the silence before she said another word. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "you build a hotel empire on the backs of people like Mrs. Fernandez, people who show up before the sun rises and leave after everyone else has gone home, people who never once asked to be trusted with your most expensive rooms and your most demanding guests, and yet you trusted her anyway, because you knew she would never let you down. And the moment something went wrong, not because of anything she did, but because of something you did not hesitate for even a single second before deciding that her life was more disposable than your reputation." She paused, letting the accusation settle fully before continuing. "You did not check the footage. You did not ask her a single question before suspending her without pay. You went straight to the police and had her named as a criminal suspect, knowing full well, because you were the one who sold that bracelet, that she had done absolutely nothing wrong." Caldwell attempted to speak, his voice thin and unconvincing, insisting that he had simply made an assumption based on standard hotel protocol, that housekeeping staff were always the first to be investigated in these situations. Judge Judy cut him off before he could finish the sentence. "Do not," she said, "insult this courtroom by pretending this was protocol. Protocol does not involve selling an item 11 days before reporting it stolen. Protocol does not involve filing an insurance claim for money you had already collected through a private sale. What you did was not an assumption, Mr. Caldwell. It was a plan, and Mrs. Fernandez was simply the most convenient person to sacrifice in order to make that plan work. She employed her, Your Honor," Caldwell's attorney interjected weakly, attempting one final defense. She had access to the room. Judge Judy turned her attention to him with a look that made him visibly regret speaking. "Access is not guilt, counselor. A receipt with your client's signature on it is considerably closer to guilt than access ever will be." She then turned to address not Caldwell, but the camera, and by extension every person watching from home, delivering the kind of monologue that would be replayed and quoted for years to come. "There is a particular kind of cowardice," she said, "that only reveals itself when a wealthy man realizes he might have to answer for something the way everyone else in society already does. He does not panic the way an honest person panics. He does not confess. He reaches for the nearest person with the least power to defend themselves and hands them the blame like it is a piece of luggage he no longer wants to carry." Mrs. Fernandez spent 12 years earning a reputation for honesty that this man tried to erase in a single afternoon, because it was easier for him to let her carry his lie than to admit he had made a mistake worth far more money than he was willing to lose. "That is not simply dishonest, Mr. Caldwell. That is cruelty dressed up in a very expensive suit." The consequences began before Judge Judy had even finished speaking. Clips of the receipt spread within minutes, and by the time the broadcast ended that evening, the Caldwell Grand Hotel chain had received more than 11,000 one-star reviews within a span of 6 hours, many of them referencing the case by name. Two corporate sponsors, who had partnered with Caldwell Properties for a hospitality awards ceremony scheduled the following month, issued statements distancing themselves from the brand entirely. A local news outlet uncovered that this was not the first time a Caldwell property had filed an insurance claim shortly after a private sale of a reported missing item. And by the following week, the State Insurance Fraud Division had opened a formal investigation into 3 additional properties under Caldwell's ownership. Former employees began coming forward publicly, describing similar patterns of blame shifted onto housekeeping and maintenance staff whenever inventory discrepancies arose. Discrepancies that, in hindsight, many of them now believed were never accidents at all. Marcus Caldwell, who had walked into that courtroom certain